Welcome to Truth Over Belief, 2008.
Based on part one and part two, we've discovered that if someone is outside of the general population, the person is immediately rejected. And this goes even further. For instance, the general population has its own definition, for instance, of a genius. Their definition of a genius, of course, is incorrect because they don't know what a genius is since they're not one themselves. The genius is outside of the limits of their understanding and their self. And so their definition of a genius becomes a magnification of themselves. In other words, someone who's able to do what they do but do more of it, someone who's able to do what they do but do it faster. And so if a true genius comes along, then since he is not part of the group, the general population, he'll be rejected and assumed that there's something very much wrong with the person because he's a genius. Now, a fine example of that, there was one fellow who, when it came to time for the annual student review, and the teachers meet the parents and so forth and discuss the student's progress, this particular student, the teacher said to the parents, "I'm afraid your son is a backward child. He's a very slow learner. I'm afraid it's clear that he has absolutely no academic future to be looking forward to, and he will eventually be dropping out of school, if not quite soon." Now, here's a picture of this particular fellow. Perhaps you might recognize him. Of course, his name is Albert Einstein. Now, simply because of his way of thinking, he was not interested in tiny little pieces of information known as units of knowledge. He would rather sit back and absorb vast amounts of awareness as singular but huge units of understanding rather than knowing. He was more interested in understanding. And so since that did not meet the normal behavior, therefore it was considered that he was basically a backward child, a nobody, an outcast, a hopeless case. And so that's the typical error in judgment made by the general population when exposed to truths which are in any way outside of the normal truths that one is exposed to on a daily basis. Getting back to part two, I also pointed out that there's two planes of reality, the relativistic, which is confined to the present time, and the holistic, which extends across all time. And an event occurs at the point of intersection. Now, that means that there are two kinds of events, a holistic event and a relativistic event. Now, if an event is governed from the holistic side, obviously the outcome is going to be different than if it's governed from the relativistic side, because if it's governed from the holistic side, circumstances over a certain time period will determine how the event takes place, or what exactly the event will be. If it's a relativistically controlled event, then the circumstances are dealing with simply real time alone. For instance, what do I mean by that? Well, imagine a baseball passes in front of you from left to right, and then once it's out of the way, another one passes from above you down to your feet and actually crosses the path of that first baseball. But it doesn't really matter the fact that it crossed the path because the first baseball was already out of the way. However, in the holistic plane of reality, the rules are different because you literally look across time. Therefore, the complete path of baseball number one is seen. It's all part of one picture. Therefore, holistically, baseball number two could not actually cut through the path of baseball number one because the entire path is part of the picture. And so let's imagine you had something like, imagine photons of light. Imagine that they're like strings, or instead of a string, you could imagine maybe a pen. And now these photons have a spin. So if picture the pen spinning end over end as it moves across space, right? And so its actual path, the path of that pen itself, would be like a corkscrew-like shape cutting across space. Now imagine different photons coming at an angle at each other, slightly different angles, and crossing each other's paths. In some cases, that corkscrew-like shape will block another photon's path, but in other cases, another corkscrew-like shape will just wrap around the first one and get by without actually hitting the first path. And so some paths will be blocked and some will not. There's an experiment known as the two-slit light experiment. First of all, you get a monochromatic light, that's single color. You send that through a wall with a tiny hole in it. After the hole, the light tends to fan out a bit. Then you get to another wall with two holes or two slots, which are close together. Then the light fans out after passing through those slots. and then the light from one slot interferes with the light from the other slot. And so at the destination wall, shortly further down, you'll have an interference pattern, a wave-like pattern of increase and decrease in intensity. And this, in actual fact, would be a magnification of that corkscrew-like path shape of these photons as they interfere with each other. That's if we allow the experiment to function as a holistic event. However, if we put sensors at the two slots and detect photons passing through the slots, that's a real-time event. We've introduced a circumstance to make real-time relativistic events occur. And so suddenly that interference wave-like pattern at the destination wall disappears as soon as you start detecting the photons passing through the slots. Now in the land of physics, this is known as the collapse of the quantum wave, but it's actually a collapse of a holistic event is what's really happening. And now it's all determined by real-time events instead. And so here we have a demonstration or a verification of the existence of the holistic plane of reality and holistic events. But the presence of the holistic reality also explains action at a distance, because it seems to be action at a distance across time. But from the holistic point of view, time is basically taken out of the equation, and also explains entangled pairs and so forth. But unfortunately, it also explains the victimization of 1% of the population. As you know, if you do an MRI scan and have a person listen to music, a certain area of the brain becomes more active than the rest, and some of the other parts of the brain start to shut down to a certain degree. Or if they start thinking about mathematics, it'll be a different part of the brain which becomes highly active, and the other part that was active during the music begins to shut down. And unfortunately, when these areas of the brain become inactive, there are no longer any real-time events going on in those areas of the brain. And thus, that despicable Satan character can now come in and take advantage of these areas of the brain by having them function holistically. And this includes the nervous system, the body, and so forth. So if you relax the body, then he can step in, now that the real-time events are not occurring, and have holistic events occur. So these poor victims, for instance, if they try to get some sleep, the mind's beginning to shut down, and in he comes and torments the mind. And so it literally drains and exhausts the mind. And so for years on end, they never truly get a single moment of relaxation. And they have no idea what that's like for these people. Many of the victims report thought insertion, thought withdrawal, and so forth. Victims can report these truths to anyone, and of course nobody will accept it because most people prefer to be slaves to general beliefs rather than think independently because it requires effort. Thus the truth spoken by these people is rejected instantly, and Satan is just rubbing his hands and laughing because the believers of this world are in complete support of Satan due to them insisting upon instant rejection of truths. This is the expression, seeing is believing, and as we've made clear here, believing does not connect you directly to the truth. That's why you're dependent upon beliefs in the first place, because you're not directly connected to the truth. So the fact that seeing is believing allows error to be a part of the package, since less than truth can lead to error. It also provides people jobs, such as magicians, because they can deceive you, since seeing is believing, and thus you can be deceived due to not being connected directly to the truth. Without the axis of the mind pointing towards the truth, there's a lot that can be misunderstood. For instance, one may view the motion of a car and draw the wrong conclusion. Cars appear to be moving at different speeds. That is what a believer sees. But in actual fact, we have cars constantly moving at a fixed magnitude of motion. When you hit the accelerator pedal, you're simply changing the direction of travel of the car. Or if you hit the brake pedal, you're changing the direction of travel. And in part 4, we'll show the step-by-step common sense procedure used to recognize what's truly going on and to see the flaw of the basic perception of motion that one has acquired through childhood years and so forth. Within a short time period, you'll understand it through a simple geometric representation of it. You create equations, and before you know it, you have the Lorentz-Fitzgerald contraction equation, the so-called time dilation equation, the velocity addition equation, and so forth.